My son-in-law reached across my dining room table, lifted the dessert plate out from in front of my daughter, and grinned at the rest of us like he'd just done something charming. Whoa there, Butterball. The word landed in the middle of my Sunday tablecloth and just sat there. My granddaughter's fork clattered against her plate. My husband went stone still beside me, and my daughter, 31 years old, the kindest soul I have ever known, turned a deep, blotchy red and folded in on herself, right there in her chair, like she was trying to take up less room in her own family. You don't need those empty calories, Greg said, setting her plate down next to his own. I'm looking out for your health. Then he looked around the table, smiling, waiting for the rest of us to laugh with him. He had no idea he had just told the last joke he would ever tell in my house. My name is Evelyn. I'm 63 years old. I spent 34 years as a postpartum nurse on the mother-baby unit at Riverside Memorial, and I have spent 30 years as my family's unofficial peacemaker, the one who smooths things over, the one who smiles when she wants to snap, the one who keeps everybody fed and calm and moving along. I am very good at that job. That night, I retired from it. But here's what I need you to understand before I go back and tell this properly. I was not the one who finished Greg. I said my piece. I'll get to that. But the thing that actually ended him had been sitting 8 inches from his elbow the entire evening, inside a purse my daughter guarded all night like it was full of state secrets. What was inside that purse ended a marriage, exposed a $48,000 fraud, and put a felony on the record of a man who believed discipline was something you did to other people. That dinner was 14 months ago. To understand what was in the envelope, you have to understand the 6 years that led up to it. Let me back up all the way. Sunday dinner has been sacred in my house for 30 years. Pot roast in the winter, lemon chicken when the weather turns, and every single week, all day in the kitchen. Because that's how I say the things I'm not always brave enough to say out loud. Dennis, my husband, was a union electrician for 39 years. He's a man of few words and very precise hands. He shows love by fixing the thing before you knew it was broken. I show it in casseroles. Between the two of us, our daughter Sally grew up in a house where nobody yelled and nothing stayed broken for long. In every family, there's a person whose unofficial job is to sand down the edges. For 30 years, that was me. I kept the peace the way some people keep a garden, constantly, quietly, and mostly on my knees. I want to tell you about Sally before Greg, because you deserve to meet her the way she actually is. Sally is the child who stood on a kitchen chair at 5 years old, licking chocolate frosting off the wooden spoon while I pretended to scold her. She's the teenager who tutored the neighbor's boy in algebra for free because he was embarrassed to ask. And she's the adult who ran the front office of a 3-dentist practice for 6 years. The schedule, the insurance billing, the books, all of it. Dr. Hutton used to tell me at church that Sally could reconcile a month of accounts faster than his software could. She was the person other people handed chaos to. She handed it back alphabetized. Then she met Greg Calloway at a co-ed softball league, sales manager at Meridian Air Systems, a regional HVAC distributor, handsome in a golf shirt way, big laugh, firm handshake, a protein shaker permanently attached to one hand. He called me Mama Evelyn the second time we met, and I remember being charmed by that, which tells you something about how good he was. At the wedding, his toast got the biggest laugh of the night. I finally found a girl who laughs at all my jokes, he said, raising his glass to my daughter. She'd better keep it up. The room laughed. I laughed. I have thought about that toast more times than I can count. Emmy came 2 years later, and with Emmy came the depression. I knew what I was looking at by the second week. 34 years on a mother-baby unit teaches you the difference between exhausted and drowning. The flat voice. The way Sally held her beautiful, healthy newborn like she was afraid of dropping something that belonged to somebody else. I got her in front of her doctor. Greg's contribution, delivered from the couch, was, "Women have been having babies since forever." She started counseling. For a while, it helped. She laughed again. She came back to herself in pieces. And then, slowly, things I couldn't name started happening. Slowly is how it always happens. Nobody hands you a manual titled How to Watch Your Daughter Disappear. You just notice things. And I noticed everything. Mothers notice. Nurses notice worse. The first thing I let myself see was the Thanksgiving when Emmy was 4. We just sat down, 12 of us, the good tablecloth, and Greg took out his phone and photographed Sally's plate before she'd picked up her fork. "For the accountability log," he said, winking at my brother-in-law. "I'm her coach." Sally smiled at her lap. I told myself it was one of those couples things. People do macros now. They do apps. They photograph their food and call it wellness. She's an adult, I said to myself. If she asked him to help her, then this is what support looks like in 2021, and you're an old woman who doesn't understand it. That rationalization survived until the pie came out, and Emmy, 4 years old, looked up from the kids' table and announced, to no one in particular, "Mommy's not allowed to have roles. Not allowed." A 4-year-old reciting household policy. Something cold went down my spine, one vertebra at a time. I carried dishes to the kitchen so nobody would see my face, and when Sally came in with the gravy boat, I asked her quietly if everything was all right with the food thing. "It was my idea, Mom," she said. She was looking at the dish towel when she said it. "He's helping me." I asked him to. You learn things in nursing. When a patient answers your question while looking somewhere else, at the floor, at the door, at their partner, the answer usually isn't theirs. But she was my daughter, not my patient, and I told myself that supporting her meant believing her. That was the first lie I helped with. It wasn't the last. The second thing was the money, and it started about 18 months before that final dinner. I was with Sally at the pharmacy. I'd driven her because her car was in the shop again. again, and the total came to $23.60. Her card declined. She tried it again, declined again. And my daughter, standing in front of a bored teenage cashier, apologized so many times you'd have thought she'd broken a window. Her hands were unsteady over the card reader. I paid the $23.60, and she talked the whole way to the car in a bright, rehearsed voice about how Greg had moved some money between accounts, and it was a mix-up. Just a mix-up. He handles all that. Mix-ups happen, I told myself. Dennis and I had a card declined in Florida once. It happens. Then, a few months later, I walked into my own garage to get the folding chairs and interrupted my daughter whispering to her father. She went quiet the second she saw me, but Dennis doesn't keep things from me, and that night he told me Sally had asked to borrow $60 in cash for Emmy's field trip to the aquarium. Please don't tell Greg, she'd said. He doesn't like surprises in the account. $60 for her daughter's field trip from a woman who used to balance a dental practice's books to the penny. I stood at my kitchen sink after Dennis told me, wringing a dish towel like it owed me money, doing the arithmetic that wouldn't come out right. Greg had a good job. Sally sold her car when Emmy was born. One car family, we're optimizing. Greg had announced, like it was a promotion. Their house was nice. His truck was new. He'd shown up at Easter wearing a fitness watch that cost $400 because he told us what it cost, twice. There were stacked tubs of supplement powder along one wall of their garage like sandbags before a flood, and my daughter was borrowing field trip money in whispers. I tried to fix it the only way a peacemaker knows how, sideways, gently, with plausible deniability. At a 4th of July barbecue, I mentioned, oh so casually, that I still had the budgeting spreadsheet I'd used for our household for years, and I'd be happy to set one up for them, just to make things easier. Greg didn't even let Sally open her mouth. We're good, Evelyn, he said, loud enough for the whole patio, tongs in hand. Sally could lose track of $1 in an empty room. He laughed, and everyone gave him that small, polite, terrible laugh that people give the man holding the grill tongs. Sally studied her paper plate. The woman who had reconciled accounts for a living for years said absolutely nothing while her husband told a patio full of family that she couldn't count. I told Dennis that night that something was wrong with their money. Their money is their business, Dennis said. We were both right. That's the problem with staying out of it. Wrong finds you anyway. It just waits until dinner. The third thing was the shrinking of her world, and by the time I saw it clearly, most of it had already happened. Sally missed her best friend Jenna's baby shower, a shower she'd helped plan, because of a stomach bug that, as far as I could tell, lasted exactly one Saturday. Later, I learned Greg had taken her car in for service that morning without telling her. It was the third time that month the car had needed something on a day Sally had somewhere to be. She quit the Wednesday Moms group at the community center, the one I'd found for her, the one where she'd finally made friends who understood what the hard years after a baby feel like. When I asked why, she gave me a little laugh that wasn't hers and said, Greg says paying strangers to complain about your husband is a scam? It was free, by the way. The group was free. Her texts changed. They came back hours late and oddly formal, like postcards written under supervision. When she was at my house, her phone sat face down on the counter the way you hold your breath, deliberately and with effort. And one afternoon, while I was cutting the crusts off a sandwich, Emmy said, in the offhand way 6-year-olds detonate things, Daddy reads Mommy's phone at breakfast. He does a silly voice. A silly voice. He performed her private messages over cereal. I told myself couples share phones. I told myself I was old and phones were different now. The rationalizations were getting thinner, and I knew it, and I kept ironing them out and wearing them anyway. I tried twice to steal her. A mother-daughter weekend on the coast. 2 nights, my treat. I'd had the little motel picked out since spring. The first time it couldn't happen because Emmy needed routine. The second time, Greg booked a guy's trip for the same weekend, which meant Sally had to stay home with Emmy, which meant, his words, maybe next year, Mama Evelyn. So at Emmy's 6th birthday party, I stopped being sideways about it. I found Greg alone by the cooler, and I said, plainly, that I missed my daughter, and that I wanted more time with her, and that I hoped he'd help me make that happen. Greg smiled at me. He has an excellent smile. He dropped his voice into something warm and reasonable and said, you know, my folks keep asking us to do the holidays in Arizona. Flights are cheap in December. It'd be a shame to start splitting up traditions. That was all. He clapped me on the shoulder and went to go light the candles. I understood him perfectly. Access to my daughter and my granddaughter was a faucet, and his hand was resting on the valve, and he wanted me to see it there. I smiled back at him. I bit my tongue. I refilled the lemonade. My hands didn't steady until the candles were out. Peacemaker. The fourth thing is the one that still keeps me up some nights, because it's the one I watched happen in real time and could not stop. About 8 months before that last dinner, Sally let it drop, flat as a parking lot, that she wasn't seeing her counselor anymore. The office keeps canceling on me, she said, and the insurance changed. It's fine. It wasn't really helping anyway. It wasn't really helping anyway. My daughter didn't talk like that. That was his sentence, wearing her voice. And once I heard it, I couldn't stop hearing it. Her whole vocabulary about herself had been replaced while I wasn't paying attention. I'd forget my head if it wasn't screwed on. You know me. I ruin nice things. I'm a lot right now. Each one delivered with a little laugh in his cadence, like facts she was being a good sport about. Here's what 34 years on a mother-baby unit teaches you that no one puts in the brochure. You learn to spot a certain kind of partner, the one who answers every question you ask the patient, the one who holds all the discharge paperwork, the one who says we're fine, while the woman in the bed watches his face before she nods. Charge nurses learn to write careful, neutral notes about men like that, and we learned to schedule one extra check after visiting hours, just in case the patient wants to say something to us alone. I had seen Greg 100 times before I ever met him. I had just never imagined I'd look up from my own pot roast and find him at my table, married to my child. That was the week I started the notebook. Old habit from the floor. If it isn't charted, it didn't happen. It was a blue spiral notebook from the junk drawer, and I wrote dates, and I wrote what was said, word for word, and nothing else. November 3rd, Sunday dinner, G to S. Nobody's asking you to have opinions about the playoffs, sweetheart. January 19th, Emmy's recital. S apologized 4 times in 1 hour, counted. February 2nd, S asked G permission to order an appetizer. Used the word allowed. I didn't know what the notebook was for. Evidence is a big word for a grandmother's handwriting in a spiral pad. I only knew that somebody needed to be keeping a record, and the person whose job that should have been was busy surviving. I made one more attempt to fix things quietly. I offered, privately, just us girls folding laundry, to pay for her counseling myself, cash. Nobody had to know. The color left her face so fast I reached for her arm. Please don't, she said. If he finds a charge, if there's anything he can't, she stopped herself. The sentence she didn't finish told me more than the entire year had. And God help me, I still didn't push. I told myself pushing would make it worse, that she'd come to me when she was ready. Peacemakers are wonderful at finding the noble reason to do nothing. Then, about 6 weeks before the dinner, the 5th thing happened. The strangest one. Sally got better. Not better like before, better like different. Quieter, but in a new key. Less like fog, more like held breath. She started doing inventory 2 mornings a week at Juniper in Maine, the little boutique downtown owned by Priya Deshmukh, who is the kind of woman who notices everything and repeats nothing. Sally mentioned the job to us in a carefully offhand voice, with Greg's blessing framed right there in the sentence. Greg says busy is good for me, but I saw what came back. Her posture. Little flashes of the old front office Sally. One afternoon, she rattled off the boutique's quarterly filing dates from memory and then looked embarrassed, like she'd accidentally shown me a card from her hand. Then, 2 weeks out, I came around the side of my house with the garden hose and caught her in my driveway, on her phone, and heard 6 words before she saw me, and ended the call like it was on fire. I'll have the rest by Friday. A manila folder slid into her tote bag with the practiced smoothness of someone who had been sliding folders into bags for a while. Mom? Her chin was up. Her eyes were terrified and completely clear at the same time, which is a combination I'd only ever seen twice before, both times in delivery rooms. Trust me, please don't say anything to Greg. Not yet. Not yet. A mother can live for weeks on 2 words, and I did. Hope, it turns out, has its own kind of nausea. I didn't ask. I didn't hint. For once in 30 years, I did the hardest thing a peacemaker can ever do. Nothing. And from that day forward, her purse never left her body. Church, my kitchen, the school hallway at pickup, strapped across her chest like a courier carrying something breakable, which brings us back to Sunday. She came in looking worn down, and she had the purse, and when she sat, she looped the strap over her knee instead of hanging it on the chair the way she had for a decade. Greg came in behind her with his eyes on his phone. No hello. No thank you. He never bothered anymore. The charm was for outside people now. Dinner started fine, the way these things always start fine. Emmy told a long, winding story about a boy in her class who ate a crayon, on purpose, but also on accident, and Dennis laughed in all the right places. I asked Sally about the pottery class at the community center, the one she'd been wanting to join since summer. Maybe next week, she said softly. Greg snorted into his water glass. She always says next week. Sally's shoulders went stiff. She stared at her plate. I bit my tongue. That's my job. Keep the peace. Keep everyone fed and smiling. A few minutes later, Sally mentioned the inventory work at the boutique. Just a small proud sentence about a system she'd built for tracking stock. Busy is good, Greg said, chewing. Better than sitting around feeling sorry for yourself. Even Emmy heard that one. 6 years old, and she looked up from her mashed potatoes and whispered, Daddy, that's not nice. Greg laughed. Relax, Em. Grown-ups can joke. That's Greg in one sentence. Every cruel thing is a joke, and the rest of us are humorless for not laughing. I set down my glass. Sally caught my eye and gave me the smallest shake of her head. Don't, Mom, please. So I did what I always do. I brought out dessert, chocolate fudge cake, Sally's favorite since she was 5 years old. The same recipe she used to lick off the wooden spoon standing on a kitchen chair while I pretended to scold her. I'd made it that morning thinking one slice might remind her that she is still allowed to enjoy things. That word again. Allowed. Emmy gasped like I'd carried in a treasure chest, and Sally smiled. A real one. The first of the night. You made my favorite. Of course I did. I cut the slices. One for Emmy, one for Dennis, one for me. Sally asked for a small piece. She always asks for a small piece now. I slid it toward her. Greg waved his fork. None for me. Some of us still have discipline. Nobody laughed. And then, before the plate could reach my daughter, Greg leaned across the table and took it. Whoa there, Butterball. You already know this part. The word hanging there. The empty calories. The grin, swiveling around the table, hunting for an ally. Emmy's fork clattering down. Dennis rigid beside me. Sally turning red, eyes filling, hands pulled into her lap, folding in on herself in the chair where she has eaten Sunday dinner her whole life. Emmy's lip trembled. Mommy? I'm okay, baby, Sally whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word, and something inside me went very, very still. I didn't scream. I didn't order him out of my house. I set my fork down on the tablecloth, and I looked Greg Calloway straight in the eyes, and I asked him the only question I had left. Greg, do you want Emmy to grow up and marry a man who mocks her body, who decides what she's allowed to eat? His smirk flickered. Answer me, is that what you want for your daughter? That's not the same thing, he stammered. Why not? Dennis asked. Quiet, hard. Dennis speaks about 9 sentences per dinner, and he had just spent one of them. Because Emmy's a child. Sally is my child, I said. You called her a name in front of her daughter. You took food away from a grown woman like she needs your permission to eat. In my house. Greg's mouth opened, closed. For the first time in 6 years, no joke came out. That's when Sally stood up. The tears were gone. She was calm, calmer than I had seen her since before Emmy was born. She reached into the purse she had guarded all evening, took out a thick white envelope, and set it down beside his plate like she was dealing a card she'd been holding for a very long time. I was going to wait until after dessert, she said. Open it. Greg looked at the envelope, then around the table, and tried one last time to be the funniest man in the room. What is this, a subpoena? He laughed. Alone. Dennis stood, easy as anything. Emmy bug, grab your plate. Let's go watch the fish show in the den. Emmy, who is 6 and no fool, took her cake and her grandfather's hand and left the room looking back over her shoulder the whole way. Greg opened the envelope. I watched his face while he read the first page, and I will tell you exactly what I saw, because I've seen it before on the faces of people receiving news they thought only happened to others. The smile went first, then the color, then something in his eyes started moving fast. Left, right, left, and I realized I was watching a man do arithmetic. Across the top of the page, in bold capitals, it said, "Petition for dissolution of marriage. Sal." He put on the soft voice, the reasonable voice. Okay, you're upset. This is a massive overreaction to a joke. Keep reading, Sally said. Behind the petition was a single typed page. I found out later she had drafted it herself, formatted like the exhibit summaries she used to prepare for the practice's accountant. Sally didn't wait for him to finish it. She recited it. She had it memorized. Harbor State Bank, she said. A home equity line of credit against our house. $48,000. Opened 2 years ago with my signature on the closing documents. A signature I never signed. Notarized by Rick Salcido, who has never met me. I was at Emmy's dentist appointment that Tuesday, Greg. I still have the appointment card. You taught me to keep every receipt, remember? For the binder. The quiet in my dining room had texture. You could have folded it. The withdrawals went to 2 sportsbook apps. She went on, in the pleasant, efficient front desk voice I hadn't heard in 6 years. And $9,500 into Apex Performance LLC with Tony Marchetti. How's the pre-workout business, by the way? Is it still 4 pallets in his garage? And $11,200 out of Emmy's college fund. Her voice caught on Emmy's name. Only there. Only once. You made me apologize for $23 at a pharmacy, Greg. You made me tape grocery receipts into a binder and explain them at your little Sunday budget meetings. And the whole time, the leak in our accounts was you. You went through my mail, Greg said. It was the best he had. It's our mail, Sally said. That's rather the point. He cycled through it all in about 90 seconds. I watched it like weather. It was an investment. It was for the family. She'd never understand because she doesn't work. And then, when nothing landed, the mask came all the way off and he leaned across my table and said the thing he actually believed, the sentence that had been holding up his entire marriage. You can't afford a lawyer. Sally smiled at him then. I want you to know she smiled. Her name is Carmen Ibarra, she said. She says hello. The official copies find you Monday. Greg left without another word. We heard his truck take the corner too fast, and then the house was so quiet I could hear the den television, where a narrator was saying something gentle about Coral. Sally sat back down at her place. She looked at her hands for a second. Then she looked up at me, and my daughter, my brave, exhausted, 31-year-old daughter, said, "Is there still cake?" I cut her the corner piece, the one with the most frosting. She ate every bite of it slowly, at her own table, in her own time, and nobody said one word about it except Emmy, who wandered back in, surveyed the situation, and asked if she could have Daddy's slice since he went home. She could. She did. Sally and Emmy stayed with us that night. It was not improvised. There was a bag already in the trunk of her old CRV, important papers, Emmy's bear, 2 changes of clothes, packed 2 weeks earlier on her lawyer's advice. Dennis carried it in without being asked, and then spent 45 minutes assembling the guest room bed frame that had leaned against the wall for a year, because that is how Dennis cries. Monday morning at 9:40, a process server walked into the front office of Meridian Air Systems and served Greg his copies at the reception desk. I know the time because Carmen Ibarra's office confirmed it, and I know something else, something better. Printed right on the summons were the standard family law restraining orders that attach to both parties the moment the papers are served. Neither spouse may transfer, conceal, or dispose of marital property. Boilerplate. Automatic. Which mattered, because at 11:52 the night before, Sunday night, hours after he left my dining room, Greg had moved $6,000 out of the joint savings account into an account in his name only, and then made a cash withdrawal at an ATM on Route 9. When Carmen saw the statement, she actually smiled. Carmen Ibarra has been practicing family law for 19 years out of an office above a bakery, so every hard conversation in that room smells faintly of sourdough. She's small, wears reading glasses on a chain, and speaks to Sally, never about her, which after 6 years of Greg was its own kind of medicine. Time-stamped panic, she said, tapping the statement. Judges love a timeline. It was Carmen who first said the words out loud at the end of their first meeting, after Sally had spent an hour narrating her marriage in the apologetic voice of a woman woman reporting her own weather. Carmen took off the reading glasses and said, "Mrs. Calloway, I want to name what you're describing because it has a name. Financial abuse, coercive control, the food, the money, the phone, the appointments. It's one system, not separate problems." Sally told me later that she cried in the car for 20 minutes, not because it was news, because it had a name, and a name meant it wasn't her. Carmen brought in 2 more people, and I want to introduce them properly because they are the reason this story ends the way it does. The first was Dana Kowalski, a certified fraud examiner, 12 years doing forensic accounting, a former bank auditor with a laptop full of stickers and the bedside manner of a very kind scalpel. Dana took 18 months of statements and turned $48,000 of chaos into one chart with colored arrows, $27,300 to the sports books, in deposits of $200 and $500, small enough to feel survivable, Dana said, frequent enough to bleed the equity out, $9,500 into Apex Performance LLC, the rest servicing minimum payments to keep the mask on, and the $11,200 pulled from Emmy's college fund, a non-qualified withdrawal, which meant taxes and a 10% penalty Greg had quietly routed to his office address, so the paperwork never touched the house. Then Dana did my favorite thing. She went through the joint checking account and highlighted every transaction Sally had made in a year. Every single one. Groceries, school shoes, the $23.60 at the pharmacy. She turned the laptop around. "Your daughter's spending problem," she said, "is a rounding error." The second person was Detective Marcus Whitfield, 16 years on the job, Economic Crimes Unit, although we did not get to him directly. The first officer Sally spoke to when she walked into the station with her folder to report the forged signature was polite and bored and said the sentence they apparently hand out at the academy. "This sounds like a civil matter, ma'am." "They always say that," Carmen told her. "Ask for economic crimes. Say the words recorded instrument, because here is the detail that changed everything, the one Greg never bothered to learn. When you take a loan against a house, a deed of trust gets recorded with the county. Greg hadn't just forged my daughter's name on a private paper. He had caused a false instrument to be filed in the public record." Whitfield laid it out across his desk in a handwriting that sloped like rain. "Forgery, identity theft, offering a false instrument for recording. That last one's a felony," he said, because the county recorder's office doesn't have a sense of humor. He asked Sally the same questions 3 different ways, and I watched her realize, somewhere in the second hour, that he wasn't doubting her. He was building something that couldn't be knocked over. The notary folded in one afternoon, Rick Salcido, a mobile notary from Greg's gym orbit, whose journal for that Tuesday listed an expired driver's license number and no signature. When Whitfield visited, Salcido went pale and cooperative in the same minute. Greg had told him Sally signed at home, that she was dealing with health stuff, that it was a formality between friends. He surrendered his commission and gave a statement with Greg's name all over it. And the appointments? The counseling office that kept canceling on Sally? She found them herself in the trash folder of her own email account, which keeps deleted messages for 30 days. 6 cancellation confirmations, sent from her address, on mornings she could prove she was in the school pickup line. Greg had her password. Greg had everything. Her new counselor, Dr. Naomi Feld, 22 years of practice, a specialty in exactly this, sat with her twice a week and helped her turn 6 years of fog into a declaration a judge could hold. That was when Carmen photographed my notebook. I almost didn't show it to her. Evidence is a big word for a grandmother's spiral pad, but she turned the pages slowly. The dates, the quotes, the counted apologies, and then she looked up at me over the reading glasses. "Dates and direct quotes contemporaneously recorded," she said. "Mrs. Hart, do you know how rare this is? Nurses make my favorite witnesses. If it isn't charted, it didn't happen. 34 years, and the floor trains you for things you never see coming." Then came the worst 9 days of the whole affair. Greg hired a lawyer whose website used the word aggressive 4 times, and 3 weeks after being served, his response landed. He was requesting primary custody of Emmy. The declaration described my daughter as suffering from a long, untreated history of mental instability. It called her erratic. It said she was unable to maintain employment, and that the minor child's stability depends on the father's structure and discipline. Discipline. There was that word again. Sally read it at my kitchen table, and I watched 6 weeks of rebuilding fall out of her face in about 40 seconds. Because that document was Greg's actual masterpiece. 6 years of sabotage, submitted to a court as symptoms. He had canceled her treatment, then filed papers calling her untreated. He had confiscated her paycheck's very existence, then called her unemployed. He had built the cage and was now charging admission to look at the bird. "What if he's right about me?" she whispered. I found her at my kitchen table at 2:47 in the morning, the pages spread out, her tea gone cold, reading his sentences about her over and over like they were a mirror. Emmy asleep down the hall. 9 days until the hearing on temporary orders. That same week, Harbor State Bank sent a notice of default on the line of credit Greg had stopped paying. The house my mother Ruth's $60,000 had put the down payment on when she passed. The house Emmy's whole childhood lived in, now past due on a debt my daughter never signed. Everything at once. That's how it works. The systems don't fail politely, single file. They pile up at the door. I got Carmen on speaker at 7 the next morning, and I will love her forever for the flatness of her voice. "Good," she said. He put the pattern in writing and signed it under penalty of perjury. He is telling a judge that a mother can't be trusted with her child because she was depressed and sought help, while we hold proof that he canceled the help. Sally, breathe. breathe, then write your declaration and let him keep talking. So we wrote. Sally wrote hers with Dr. Feld, plain and unflinching. Priya wrote one about the punctual, meticulous woman who had rebuilt her inventory system and never once missed a shift. Dennis wrote 3 paragraphs in pencil first, and the last line was, "In 11 years, I never heard Greg speak to my daughter the way I have spoken to my wife for 40 of them. I wrote 10 pages in one sitting by hand, like charting the longest shift of my life, and then I typed them up and attached photographs of a blue spiral notebook. Emmy, thank God, was kept out of all of it. She knew Mommy and Daddy were taking a break, and that she now had 2 houses, and that Grandma's house had better snacks. One night at bath time, she looked up at me through the shampoo and asked, 'Is Mommy allowed to have cake at your house?' 'Baby,' I said, 'Mommy is allowed to have anything she wants.' Emmy considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court. 'Good,' she said. 'Save me the corner piece too.' The hearing was in Department 12, in front of Commissioner Alvarez, in a courtroom that smelled like paper and burnt coffee. It lasted under an hour. Carmen walked the commissioner through it in her bakery calm voice, the forged closing documents and the notary's statement, Dana Kowalski's chart with the colored arrows, the 11:52 p.m. transfers, time-stamped panic, the cancellation emails set side by side with the school pickup logs, the declarations, the notebook. Greg's lawyer pivoted twice mid-argument, which is something you can watch happen, like a sail losing its wind. When he got to the phrase, "the petitioner's financial irresponsibility," Commissioner Alvarez raised one hand, paged back through Dana's report, and looked over her glasses. "Counsel, your client's position is that the petitioner is reckless with money." She tapped the page. "She spent $23 at a pharmacy. He spent $27,000 at a sports book." A pause you could have harked a truck in. "I've seen enough." Temporary orders came down that afternoon. Primary physical custody of Emmy to Sally, joint legal, alternate weekends for Greg conditioned on a co-parenting course, guideline child support and interim spousal support, exclusive use of the house to Sally, with Greg solely responsible for the line of credit payments pending trial, accounts frozen. And a finding, read aloud in that dry courtroom voice, that the respondent's declaration was not credible on the issue of the petitioner's fitness. Not credible. My notebook and my daughter versus a man's smirk. The record now says which one the court believed. The criminal case moved the way Whitfield promised, slowly, then all at once. 5 months later, the district attorney filed on the forgery and the false instrument, and Greg's aggressive lawyer turned out to be very reasonable about pleas. Greg pleaded guilty to felony forgery, 3 years of formal probation, 240 hours of community service, and a restitution order with his name on it for the full $48,000 plus the $11,200 back into Emmy's college fund. Every dollar, with the penalties. No jail. First offense, nonviolent, and I've made my peace with that because prisons let you out, and restitution orders follow you like weather. Meridian Air Systems let him go 6 weeks after the plea. Sales runs on trust and a clean record, and he'd just lost both. I'm told he works at a fitness equipment store in a strip mall now. I'm told he's very disciplined about his numbers. The divorce was final in month 13. The settlement traced my mother's $60,000 back out of the house as Sally's separate property, and because the code has remedies for a spouse who takes marital assets by fraud, the misappropriated value came out of Greg's side, with attorney's fees on top. Sally sold the house in the spring. Her choice. She said it had too many rooms shaped like the old life, and bought a small bungalow 10 minutes from us with a crooked lemon tree in the back. She runs the office for both Juniper and Maine locations now. Priya opened the second store in the fall and told me at the ribbon cutting that she'd have opened it a year earlier if she'd had Sally a year earlier. And on Tuesday nights, my daughter goes to the pottery class at the community center. Not next week. This week. Every week. The first thing she ever made was a lopsided blue bowl, glazed the color of a July sky, and it sits on my kitchen counter, and I keep lemons in it. Last Sunday, a year and a bit now, since the envelope, we sat down to dinner. Pot roast because it's winter. Dennis at his end. Priya, who has a standing invitation. Emmy, 7 now, telling a knock-knock joke so bad and so long that she lost the thread in the middle and had to start over, and the whole table laughed anyway because in my house, jokes are still allowed. They just have to be funny to everyone, including the person they're about. Emmy's are. Greg gets his alternate weekends. Emmy comes home from them loved and a little sugar-crazed, and she talks about her daddy at my table freely because she is 7 and he is her father, and that is her love to spend. Nobody in my house will ever teach that child to apologize for what she loves. We are done with that curriculum forever. When the cake came out, chocolate fudge, the old recipe, Sally cut her own slice, a big one, that particular Sunday. Some Sundays it's a sliver. It is, every single Sunday, entirely her own business. I spent 30 years believing that keeping the peace meant keeping quiet. I know the difference now. Quiet is what I was doing all those years at that table, biting my tongue while a man carved my daughter down joke by joke. Peace is what's in my kitchen on Sunday afternoons now. My daughter at the counter with the wooden spoon frosting on her knuckle, and her own daughter standing up on the chair beside her waiting her turn to lick it. In my house, everybody gets dessert.